Welcome everyone, welcome back to Space City X-Files, the podcast where the unsolved, the unexplained, and the unbelievable come to light. I'm your host Rick, guiding you through the intricate labyrinth of the world's most baffling mysteries. Today, we embark on a journey back in time to a small town in Arkansas where a chilling case remains shrouded in mystery for over 3 decades now. In the heart of Alexander, Arkansas, the summer of 1987 started just like any other, with the hum of cicadas and the promise of endless possibilities. But beneath the veneer of this sleepy town lay a story so perplexing, so fraught with twists and turns, that it continues to haunt the corridors of justice to this very day. This is the story of Don Henry and Kevin Ives, 2 teenagers whose tragic fate transformed them into symbols of one of the most enigmatic and disputed cases in American history. A case that has come to be known as the Boys on the Track. As the sun set on August 23, 1987, Don and Kevin, like many teens, sought adventure in the great outdoors. But what transpired that night would lead to more questions than answers, igniting a firestorm of controversy, conspiracy, and a relentless quest for truth from the parents. From the bewildering initial investigation to the labyrinth of theories that emerged in its wake, their stories is not just a tale of a small town tragedy, but a complex web of intrigue that challenges the very foundations of justice in Arkansas. Join me now as we unravel the layers of this intense mystery, seeking answers to questions that have perplexed investigators, haunted a community and a family, and captivated the nation. This is Space City X-Files, episode 41, the unsolved case of Don Henry and Kevin Ives. Before we continue with our investigation into Don and Kevin's mission for justice and truth, we'd like to take a moment to express our gratitude to all our listeners. At Space City X-Files, we strive to provide the best possible experience by keeping our episodes free of commercials and ads. We rely on your support to help us grow and reach more people who share our passion for uncovering the mysteries of the unknown. If you enjoyed today's episode, we kindly request that you take a few minutes to leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening on. If the platform doesn't allow for a written review, then a 5-star rating or a social media share would be equally as great. Your feedback is invaluable in spreading awareness about the show and attracting those new listeners that we are looking for. Additionally, if you would like to make a monetary contribution to support the program, you can visit our website and click on the Support Us tab, or just scan the QR on the screen at any time to be directed to our donation page. Every penny we receive goes directly towards enhancing the quality of our content and furthering the dream of doing what we love to do full time. We appreciate your consideration and ongoing support. Your involvement ensures that we can continue to deliver thought-provoking episodes like today's over this tragic, unsolved tale. Thank you again for being a part of Space City X-Files, and we look forward to bringing you more captivating content in the future. This will conclude today's announcements. The case of Don Henry and Kevin Ives begins in the small town of Alexander, Arkansas, on the night of August 23, 1987. Don, 16, and Kevin, 17, were typical high school students with a taste for outdoor adventures. Now remember, this was the 80s, all right? People still went outdoors at that time, and it was still safe to do so. That night, they stayed the night together, and they set out to go spotlight hunting near the local railroad tracks, a popular pastime in the rural areas. All right, so this was nothing out of the ordinary. Their parents trusted them, so it was no biggie. Unbeknownst to the family, this would be the last time anyone would see the boys alive, and this would also set into action a series of events that remain a subject of speculation and investigation decades later. In the early hours of August 23rd, the boys' lifeless bodies were discovered laid across the railroad tracks. Discovery was made by a train engineer, Stephen Schroyer, who reported seeing the bodies and blowing the train horn as loud as he could, as much as he could, but to no reaction. Not even a lifting of the head, he informed the local authorities. Unfortunately, it was too late to stop the mile-long train, which would subsequently run over the bodies of the boys. Now, initially, it was believed that the boys had fallen asleep on the tracks after smoking marijuana, leading to the tragic accident. First on the scene was local law enforcement, Saline County Sheriff's Officer Chuck Talon, the state medical examiner who Dr. Fahmy Malak conducted all the initial autopsies, right? And it was his conclusion that the boys had consumed a significant amount of marijuana, an extreme amount, and had passed out on the tracks. I think he said it was like the equivalent to like 20 or 50 joints, is what he said. Now, investigators of the scene ruled out any possibility of foul play right off the bat. Now, according to them, this was just another tragic accident. This ruling, though, raised immediate questions, particularly among the families of the boys. Linda Ives and Larry Ives, Kevin's parents, Curtis and Donna Henry, Don's parents, were skeptical of the ruling right away. Knowing their sons, they found it unbelievable that the boys would choose to lie down in such a dangerous and exposed place. All right, not to mention they were there smoking 50 joints, one after another. I mean, after all, these boys were avid hunters, so were the parents, and this most certainly was not their first rodeo when they're out in the woods, right? So their skepticism and insistence on further investigation would soon lead to a very heated battle with the authorities involved. As the family pushed for answers, discrepancies in the initial investigation began to emerge. Now, criticism was leveled at both the law enforcement response and Dr. Malak's conclusion. All right, these families, the family's persistence led to a second autopsy, which revealed startling new evidence that was brought to light by Atlanta-based pathologist Dr. Joseph Burton. Now, what he would find would not only shock the family and community, but it would hint at gross negligence or possibly even criminal activity by the first responders who were initially involved. The revelation of this new evidence fueled further speculation and investigation, and the families who had been dissatisfied with the official handling of the case became even more determined to uncover the truth. This case, marked by conflicting autopsies, shifting narratives, and a growing list of involved parties, rapidly evolved into a complex web of theories and speculation. The initial police investigation, the medical examiner's findings, and the family's relentless pursuit of the truth set the stage for a mystery that continued to deepen, drawing national attention and sparking a wide array of theories about what really happened to Don and Kevin that night on the tracks. In this next segment of Space City X-Files, we delve into the initial ruling and the ensuing controversy in the mysterious case of Don Henry and Kevin Ives. When tragedy struck on the tracks that night in 1987, it set in motion a series of events that would ripple through the small town of Alexander, Arkansas, and far beyond. Nobody expected it to get as big as it did. The initial investigation into the deaths was spearheaded by the state medical examiner, Dr. Fahmy Malak. But almost immediately, many began to suspect that Dr. Malak was in a hurry to put this case in the books. His conclusion was as straightforward as it was controversial. Don and Kevin had consumed a significant amount of marijuana, leading to them to fall asleep on the tracks, tragically resulting in their deaths. This was his professional opinion, and because of this, their deaths were ruled a suicide, causing the case to be open and shut, not allowing for further investigation. Right? This ruling was met with immediate skepticism, not just from the boys' families, but from all the members of the community who knew them well. Teachers, friends, family, you name it, they all said this was just not the boys. This is not what they did. For Linda and Larry Ives, Kevin's parents, Curtis and Don's parents, this explanation was equally as unacceptable. They knew their sons. The idea that they would be so impaired as to lie motionless in the path of an oncoming train was inconceivable. Or the idea that they wanted to take their own lives was equally as ridiculous to the family. Now, their disbelief was the catalyst for a relentless quest for answers, propelling the case into a complex saga of investigation and reinvestigation. Fueled by the family's advocacy and a court order to exhume the bodies of Don and Kevin, a second autopsy was finally commissioned. Oddly, before the autopsy could be finished, it seemed like Dr. Malak started to backtrack a little bit, because he changed the cause of death, or the idea, or what his opinion was of the death, from suicide to accidental. And this looked like it was like in a big attempt to like pacify the family, right? To get them to calm down. All right, it wasn't suicide. It was just an accidental death. This did not sit well with the Henrys or the Ives. This really pissed them off. All right, the family's determination caused the case to be picked up finally by a grand jury. All right, and this grand jury also brought in somebody who finally started getting answers, an Atlanta-based pathologist named Dr. Joseph Burton, whose findings dramatically contradicted Dr. Malak's reports. Dr. Burton's examination suggested that the boys had been unconscious or already deceased before the train's impact. He uncovered evidence of injuries inconsistent with the initial ruling. Don, for one, appeared to have suffered a stab wound in his back, while Kevin exhibited signs of blunt force trauma to the head that closely resembled the butt of his own .22 caliber rifle, the one that he had with him. All right, the revelations from the second autopsy escalated the situation. What initially seemed like a tragic accident was now shrouded in suspicion and uncertainty. Questions were raised about the competence of the initial investigation and the reliability of the state medical examiner's findings. The community's trust in the legal and medical system began to waver also, giving rise to public outcry for further investigation. All right, around this time, the media had now gotten wind of it and began to take interest, casting national spotlight on a small town of Alexander. The case, with its conflicting autopsies and unanswered questions, became a subject of intense speculation and debate. This attention only deepened the mystery as more and more people became invested in uncovering the truth behind the boys' death. The controversy surrounding the case was not just about the conflicting medical opinions. It was about the integrity of the investigative process, the reliability of the authorities involved, and the desperate need for closure by the grieving families. Right? Those poor parents. The boys' parents, who initially sought only answers about their son's tragic deaths, found themselves now at the center of a growing storm of theories and speculation, ranging from drug-related foul play to cover-ups at the highest judicial levels in that town. As we continue to unravel the layers of this complex case, the initial ruling and subsequent controversies remain pivotal. They highlight not just the tragedy of Don and Kevin's death, but also the broader issues of justice, trust in the system, and the relentless pursuit of truth by those left behind. Hold on, we'll be right back. So in our next segment, we were going to jump to the conspiracy portion, but to set the table for that, I feel like we need to call out some of the discrepancies that were uncovered during the grand jury trial or investigation, all right, as the case progressed. Now, some of these are so incredibly shocking. It's a real wonder how in the hell this case was never upgraded to a homicide. All right, this is a spoiler alert because it never was, and it was never solved. So to start off with, first, we had the medical examiner himself, Dr. Malak. Now, Dr. Malak grossly mishandled the case by missing key evidence later discovered by Dr. Burton. And even after the evidence of his miscalculations piled up against him, he still refused to admit that they were relevant, and he even doubled down on his initial findings, which almost single-handedly stymied any possible hope for an upgrade in the cause of death. This brings us to our next point. What exactly did Dr. Burton find? All right, let's go over that. To start off, Dr. Burton was immediately met with opposition from Dr. Malak. When the parents of Don and Kevin asked for samples of the remains of their son, Dr. Malak flat out refused to release them. That's not suspicious, right? The parents ended up having to sue in a court of law to gain a court order, and when they did, Dr. Malak ignored the court order, causing the situation to escalate even more. Now, how would you feel at this point as a parent when you know for a fact that what they said happened to your kids did not? You're trying to investigate deeper into it, and now we have somebody flat out refusing to give you any evidence that can possibly help you. Finally, he conceded the samples to Dr. Burton, just shy of being held in contempt of court. During the analysis, Dr. Burton discovered many discrepancies, as we mentioned, like for one, the blood test administered that found the high levels of THC was not even the right test. Dr. Malak had mistakenly used a urine test for a blood test, so there's that. Like, that evidence right there should have been thrown out. And then there was the handling of the actual skeletal remains. Dr. Burton wanted to look over the blunt force trauma Kevin had suffered to see if there were any clues, but when they arrived, he was astonished to find that they were in pieces. Dr. Malak had sawed them into squares, with the saw marks covering right over what it appeared to be the fractures. Now, of course, with the state that they were in, there was no hope of gaining a clear answer as to where they came from. So, why did he do that? Like, right off the bat, everybody knew that that's something that a medical examiner would typically not do. That was like extra of him. That was almost like mutilating the remains or trying to cover something up. That's very concerning, right? Speaking of Dr. Malak, there were far more discrepancies, but for time purposes, we'll stop here because these are the main ones, all right? This guy's demeanor throughout the whole thing was sketchy as hell, to sum it up, and it's really shocking that he was never brought up on any charges or sued or disbarred or had his practice removed. But no, he stayed in his position until he decided to step down on his own. Now, keep in mind, and this seems fishy to me right off the bat, that during this trial, Dr. Malak was being represented by the DA of Arkansas. Doesn't that seem odd or like a conflict of interest? Now, speaking of state attorneys and strange, let's now shift our focus to a man named Dan Harmon. Now, Dan got brought into this case when the grand jury got involved. He was appointed to head the reinvestigation and analyze all the new information that had come in from witnesses and Dr. Burton. Dan started as a new ally to the parents, really promising to get to the bottom of things. But in reality, he didn't really do anything. He basically looked over the evidence, which was pretty ample, and decided to side with Dr. Malak anyways. Now, some may say this is strange, but, what do you expect? The guy works for the state, right? He wasn't a private investigator. He wasn't anything like that. And so, you can't force the guy to come up with that, you can't force him to come to the right, determination, right? Some may say he did his best, right? He has to stay objective. He can't get emotional. And that's true. But in 1997, Dan Harmon would be charged and convicted of multiple crimes like racketeering, drug trafficking, and most importantly, using his position as an Arkansas court official to aid him in his illegal activities. Right? So, sure, that's 97, 10 years after the death of Don and Kevin. But do you think Dan just decided to go crooked in 97? Do you think that he just decided to start doing his dirt in 97? Hell no. He was most certainly doing it before that, way before that, possibly 10 years before that, or maybe even 20. I would seriously doubt that, and we'll dive into this more in the conspiracies and theories segment. For now, it's just important for you to know about these things and how they are involved. And now we'll move forward with what the people close to the case thought happened. Hang on, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Space City X-Files. We're deep diving today into the mysterious and tragic case of Don Henry and Kevin Ives, where the truth seems as elusive as a shadow in the dark. In this segment, we explore the labyrinth of conspiracy theories, and I do mean labyrinth, that have emerged around their deaths, because they are aplenty. These theories aren't just speculation, they're a reflection of deep-seated need for answers in a case that's as complex as it is heartbreaking. Alright, so let's start with one of the most chilling theories. The connection to drug trafficking, specifically the infamous Mena connection. Now, Mena, Arkansas, which was basically right next to Alexander, in the 1980s, was literally a hub for a sprawling drug smuggling operation. Now, there was a man named Barry Seal, a notorious figure in the drug trade, but he was also a DEA informant. Now, he's a central character in this narrative. Some believe that on that fateful night, Don and Kevin unwittingly witnessed a drug drop linked to this larger operation. If this theory holds any water, it suggests a scenario straight out of a crime thriller. Two high school kids stumbling upon a secret so dangerous it cost them their lives. Could their deaths have been a move to silence them, preventing a major drug operation from being exposed? The implications of this are staggering, potentially involving high-level cover-ups and corruption. Let's have a listen to the witness statement.
Linda Ives turned this witness over to a local investigator who took him to the FBI. The FBI immediately put this witness into protective custody, gave him a polygraph test, which he passed, and opened their investigation.
Where we didn't realize there was anybody else out there at first. We were, just like I said, goofing off. We come up on, or didn't really come up on, we noticed there were people on the track, saw a flashlight come on and then go back off. They weren't looking in our direction, but we could see the light. And so we kind of quieted down and snuck up a little bit closer to see what was going on, and there was 5 individuals standing on the tracks. One thing that struck my curiosity is, at the time my mother was dating an attorney named Dan Harmon. I knew him well enough to recognize him. There were 2 more individuals that a few minutes after we got there were walking down the railroad tracks that had a rifle and what looked to be a flashlight. And they were more or less kind of minding their own business. And when they realized someone else was on the tracks, they stopped and was fixing to turn around when someone, or Danny, motioned for them to come closer over to where they were. They hesitated and eventually ended up walking on towards the rest of the group. While my head was turned, I heard what sounded like a gunshot. I saw a flash, as you would expect with a gunshot at night. We were pretty much terrified and bolted and ran.
Other witnesses corroborated that evidence.
I know that Dan Harmon went down there, because I was down the road from there. It's in an automobile. I do know that a drop was made. I've absolutely 100% unequivocally made there that night.
The people at the track that night, to my knowledge, were Dan Harmon, Keith McCaskill, Larry Rochelle. I do know that the boys were watching the drop site, okay? And they got curious as to what was being dropped there.
All right, now if you're wondering, why wasn't this brought up during the grand jury trial, these witnesses didn't come forward until way later, all right? So don't, it didn't happen when the special, when the grand jury was going on, or when Dan Harmon was a special prosecutor or special attorney. And so, I don't know. But still, it's pretty damning evidence. Why wasn't anything ever done about it? Let's move on. But the theories don't stop there. Another disturbing possibility is the alleged involvement or cover-up by local law enforcement and perhaps even state officials. Now, this theory stems from the initial mishandling of the case, disputed findings by the medical examiner, Dr. Fahmy Malak, and the ongoing battle for the boys' families for a thorough investigation. The narrative here suggests a sinister plot to silence the truth, raising questions about the integrity of those sworn to protect and serve. The involvement of Dan Harmon, the district prosecutor, who initially assisted the families but was later convicted on drug-related charges, adds a complex layer to this theory. Could his legal troubles hint at a deeper involvement or possible knowledge of what really happened that night? Then there's the angle of secret government operations, a theory that ventures into the realm of covert activities and national security. This theory is perhaps the most speculative but intriguing nonetheless. It suggests that the boys accidentally became collateral damage in a high-stakes game involving drug money funding clandestine operations. While this theory lacks solid evidence, in the murky world of secret government activities, it's a possibility that can't be entirely ruled out. As we ponder these theories, it's important to know and acknowledge the impact they've had on the case. It seems like this case was overran by theories right away because of a fumbled initial investigation and medical examination. The fascination with these theories reflects our collective desire to make sense of the senseless, to find order in chaos. In the end, the true story of what happened to Don and Kevin Ives that night remains as elusive as ever. Were their deaths a tragic accident, or were they caught in a web of criminal activities far beyond their understanding? Theories abound, but definitive answers remain just out of reach. As we continue to explore this case, we're reminded of the complexities of such investigations and the enduring human need for closure and justice. Hang on, we'll be right back with our final thought. All right, folks, we reached that part of the show where I give you my personal theory on what happened in this case. The tragic case of two young men who had their lives cut short abruptly. So what do I believe? How would you look at this case? Would you lean towards the official narrative that the boys were so high that they decided to lie down on railroad tracks and pass out, and then sleep so heavily that they couldn't even hear a train horn? Or was there something more sinister at play? Here's my take. So we're all adults, right? Most of us. We've all probably partook a time or two in some illegal substance. I, for once, used to smoke a lot of weed every day. Morning, noon, night, for years. Sometimes we would smoke a few back to back to back, and we would get high, but never to the point where I didn't know where I was or to a point where I couldn't move. It may have been an awkward movement, but the brain still had control of my limbs, right? My point is, it definitely wasn't to the point where I couldn't hear a train horn going off right next to me. And so because of that, I call BS on that aspect of the case right there. Now, the boys may have smoked a few joints, but I seriously doubt it was to the extreme that Dr. Malak said, and he had no proof. Dr. Malak's analysis should have been thrown out because he used the wrong test. So, with Dr. Malak's screw-ups and erratic behavior, the Dan Harmon revelation that he was involved with drug trafficking and racketeering while employed as a state attorney, this is enough for me to dismiss completely the theory that it was an accidental death. Now, sadly, I think the boys were murdered, and I think it was a big tragedy that this case was never given the proper attention it deserved. Not attention from the media, but attention from, because it got plenty of attention from the media, but the attention of competent investigators that are there to find what really happened. And here's how I think it went down. I think the boys already had word that drops were being made in the woods. I think that was pretty much common knowledge around that area. And they made a plan to go check it out, maybe even take what was there. They headed out around midnight for an alleged hunting trip, but instead they proceeded directly to the drop spot. I think they got there early, maybe took some of the product or money, but before they could make it out, the intended owners showed up and stopped them. I believe Dan Harmon was there, and he was in on this party, like the kid in the video stated. The boys tried to fight back, possibly run. They were beaten and then shot. Dan and his crew placed them on the tracks, and the rest is, well, what played out. From there, Dr. Malak must have been somehow involved, or if he wasn't involved, he was just incredibly stupid. Anyways, he took over, he sped the case along, open and shut, and basically tried to stonewall anyone else who got close or asked questions. I think the grand jury was a surprise, a genuine effort and victory by the parents' effort. But here comes Dan Harmon pulling the strings in the background to get himself read in as a special prosecutor to make things go away. Very sad. I think this was a classic story of backwoods state official corruption at its finest, and whoever wanted this to go away got exactly what they wanted. That's my take. All right. Well, on that note, that's going to do it for this week's episode. I hope you were able to have a listen. And if you have any information on the case of Don Henry and Kevin Ives, or would like to just share what you feel or think about what happened, then feel free to reach out to me on social media. If you don't like social media, then just send me an email at info@spacecityxfiles.com. I promise you I'll get back to you as soon as possible. I understand that if I don't message you back or if I drop out on conversations, I'm not trying to be rude. It's just because there's quite a few of them coming in these days. And it gets a little difficult at times to answer everyone. I may need to bring in a co-host soon. So if you're interested in joining, send me a message. We're going to have tryouts soon. So I need to bring somebody on to take some responsibilities. All right. But nonetheless, we love and thank you all for your support. And speaking of support, after the conclusion of the show, we ask that you just take a few minutes to leave us a written review. That would just mean the world to us. Remember, if the platform you're on doesn't allow for a written review, then just a 5-star. If you can't do that, then just go to social media and hit share on one of your favorite episodes. That would be great. That's going to wrap up this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed us. I hope you'll join us again next week for another thought-provoking episode. We're doing a topic next week on a little something called the dead internet theory. And if you like conspiracies, boy, you don't want to miss that one because it gets deep, if you know what I mean. Thank you again for joining us. It's been a blast. Until we meet again, this is Rick on behalf of the Space City X-Files telling you to keep listening, keep questioning, and keep exploring. Love you all. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Space City X-Files. Goodbye.